I sit and stare thoughtfully in front of me when I feel someone's footsteps near me. I turn my head and see him. Oliver, the same Oliver with whom they once spent their childhood. His dark hair is slightly tousled. His green eyes look straight at me, and a small smile crosses his face. My heart beats faster, and I can feel the excitement building up inside. But I try to keep calm, even if it is not easy to hold back my emotions. He sits down next to us, and a silence filled with memories hangs between us. I don't dare look him in the eyes, but I feel him studying me with his penetrating gaze. It seems that the time and distance that separated us are erased for a moment, and I suddenly remember our childhood. Laughter, long conversations. He smiles slightly, as if he remembers something too. We start talking, and as if nothing had happened, we again plunge into a familiar, warm dialogue. When I finally dare to look at him, I see in his eyes the same gleam that was in childhood, as if nothing has changed in his view over so many years. I laugh, trying to look confident, and he laughs back too. His laugh is genuine and so familiar it makes my heart stop for a moment. He asks about my life, and I carefully share, avoiding details that could ruin this fragile moment. We continue the conversation, recalling incidents from childhood, funny moments, and old dreams. It seems to me that these memories are a bridge between the past and the present, which allows us to go back to the times when everything seemed simple. He touches my hand lightly, as if checking to see if it's real. It's a short touch, but I feel its warmth, and every cell seems to respond to the gesture. We start seeing each other more often. Each meeting is like a step into the past, but also into something new at the same time. Oliver arrives first, and I notice him calmly waiting for me, with a slight smile, as if he's sure I'll come. His green eyes sparkle under the soft light, and I catch myself thinking that I'm more excited about this meeting than I care to admit. We walk side by side, and I feel him gently touch my arm. My palm is in his, and surprisingly, it feels natural, as if we've never lost touch. Our fingers close, and the heart beats out a joyful melody. Oliver looks at me, and in his eyes I see warmth and understanding, as if he is reading my mind. One day, he shows me an old photo of two children holding hands and smiling at the camera. I recognize us, carefree and cheerful, back when the world seemed so simple. He looks carefully at the photo, as if he is looking for answers to our current feelings. This moment fills me with warmth and joy, but also a little sadness for those times that cannot be returned. I can't help but ask if he ever regretted going our separate ways. He is silent for a few seconds, and then quietly replies that he has never forgotten me. His voice is full of sincerity, and I can feel this moment becoming a turning point for us. It seems that we got the second chance that we both have been waiting for so long. After these words, our meetings become more and more warm. Both the present and the past seem so real that it is almost impossible to distinguish between them. We share little secrets and dreams that were once forgotten but now have new meaning. I smile at him, realizing that our past can become our future if we want it to. Each of our meetings becomes more and more special, and I notice more and more small details that make him even closer to me. He tells me stories about himself, about things I didn't know before. Sometimes we are just silent. Everyone is immersed in their own thoughts, but this silence is not frightening. It is like a hidden promise that we will be together, as in childhood. Oliver gently touches my hand, and I feel something more than friendship being born. Something that has been buried deep in our hearts for years now comes alive with new energy. One day, when we are discussing the past, he suddenly stops, looks at me with the same expression that makes me freeze. "And if everything turned out differently then?" He asks quietly, and I feel the air between us getting heavier, as if from tension and excitement. I look into his green eyes, and for a moment the words get stuck in my throat. I feel that I can answer, but only if I am ready to accept responsibility for this conversation. I think about everything that was between us and everything that could be if we really dare to take a step forward. These words remain between us, as if opening some hidden wound that now needs an answer. I can't find the words to explain how I feel, so I just move closer and put my hand on his shoulder, feeling the slightly tense muscles relax under my fingers. He looks at me with surprise, but without looking away, he raises his hand and touches my face. His touch is warm, calm, like a promise of protection and understanding. We both linger in this moment, not daring to interrupt it. The next time we both come to the meeting with the feeling that something important has changed between us. Conversations become more frank, more meaningful. He tells me about things he used to keep inside, about his fears and dreams. I listen, and I feel myself letting him into my heart like never before. He looks at me, and in his green eyes I see a hope and a warmth that makes me feel like I'm ready to trust him completely too. We sit side by side, and he suddenly shares something that he always wanted to change in his life. I look at him and realize that I am also ready to tell about my dreams. We talk about things that we almost forgot, about everything that seemed important to us in childhood and now comes alive in our conversation. I feel that with every word, every look of his, we become closer and more open. Something deeper than friendship appears between us, and I begin to feel that with him I can really be myself. One evening we met when it was already dusk. The air was filled with peace, and the light of the lanterns gently spread around us. Oliver, always reserved, unexpectedly extended his hand to me and said, "Let's go for a walk, like we used to." I felt the warmth of his hand, and we walked together, immersed in a silence that needed no words. It seemed to me that time had stopped, and every step we took was another step towards finally finding myself next to him. After a while, Oliver turned to me with a gentle smile and looked at me in a way he hadn't looked at in a long time. Our eyes met, and I saw deep feelings in his green eyes, which it seemed he had been hiding all his life. A wave of warmth washed over me, and we stopped, staying in this moment where there was only silence and the union of souls upon us. During the walk, we reached a place that we often visited in our childhood. A pleasant silence reigned around, and I felt how it filled me with warmth and peace. We stopped by an old bench where we had once left our initials, and I saw Oliver lightly touch the engraved letters. He turned to me, and I felt that this was more than just a meeting. It was a return to our roots, to where it all began. "Remember how we sat here and dreamed about the future?" he asked, his voice filled with warmth and memories. I smiled, feeling how his words opened all the memories we carried in our hearts. In that moment, we became those kids who were close friends again, dreaming of the world, not knowing how much our lives would change. Sitting on the same bench, we begin to tell each other about our dreams, as we used to do. But this time, I feel that our words have a different meaning. They are full of maturity and understanding of who we have become. Oliver talks about his aspirations and fears, and I listen intently, feeling every word reveal a new side of his personality. I understand that he has changed, but he still remains the person I always knew. He looks at me expectantly, and I understand that he wants to hear my thoughts. I begin to tell him about my dreams, which have already become more mature and realistic. He listens without looking away, and I feel that a special connection is emerging between us, as if these shared dreams are what unites us now at this moment. We continued talking late into the night, our voices fading into the silence. There were still no concrete words between us about the future, but I felt how every look and every smile gradually created an invisible connection between us. Oliver, who was usually reserved, now became more open, and I could see that he was trying to convey to me something that had been kept inside him for a long time. His hand slowly touched mine, and I stopped, my heart racing at the simple yet meaningful gesture. Our fingers intertwined, and I realized that this night would be one of the most important of our lives. That special moment when we decided to walk together without saying a single word. When it was time to say goodbye, we both felt that something had changed. We stood facing each other, our eyes did not move away, and I noticed how his eyes became softer, more vulnerable. He leaned closer, and I felt no fear or doubt, only calmness and confidence. My eyes closed and I felt the light touch of his lips, warm and gentle, full of feelings that had been hidden in our hearts for years. It was our first kiss that lit a fire inside me, and I knew we were both ready to accept each other with all our fears and hopes. After that kiss, we stood in silence, just looking at each other, and I felt that all the barriers between us disappeared. Oliver smiled, and that smile gave me a sense of comfort and confidence. We were no longer just friends or old acquaintances. Now we became something more. Each of our next steps had a new meaning, and I knew that our lives would never be the same again. We hugged, realizing that a new chapter is ahead, which we will go through together. A few days after that evening, we met again. This time, Oliver came with a small package, holding it carefully as if it contained something very important. I looked at him questioningly, and he, smiling, handed it to me. "This is for you," he said softly, and I felt my heart fill with warmth. When I opened the package, I saw a small photo album there, memories from our childhood. I ran my fingers over the old pictures and tears welled up in my eyes. Each photo reminded of that carefree time when we were close and everything seemed possible. Oliver sat next to him and began to talk about how he kept this album with him, even when life scattered us on different roads. His voice was full of nostalgia, and I felt these memories bring us even closer. We looked at the photos together, laughed at our ridiculous poses and outfits, and reminisced about the moments that will stay in our hearts forever. It wasn't just an album. It was our story that we held in our hands. Later that evening, Oliver suggested a walk. We walked slowly, lost in our thoughts, and there was a silence between us that needed no words. The coolness of the night gently touched the skin, and the stars above us shone so brightly, as if they wanted to witness our conversation. Oliver stopped suddenly, turning to me. His face was serious, and his eyes reflected something deep, something I couldn't immediately understand. "I want you to know," he began, holding my hands, "that you were always special to me. Even when we didn't see each other, I thought about you often." His voice trembled slightly, and I felt these words touch the deepest corners of my heart. I looked at him, trying to find the right words, but instead just tightened my grip on his hands, letting the silence speak for me. The next time we met was in the rain. I was standing by the road when Oliver came up with an umbrella, smiling as if there was nothing strange about the situation. He opened the umbrella, covering us both, and said, "Well, now you definitely won't get wet." I laughed looking at him, and we walked together listening to the raindrops patter softly on the fabric of the umbrella. We talked small things, laughed and shared our thoughts while the rain danced around us. At one point, Oliver suddenly stopped and raised his head, looking at the sky. "Remember how we used to run in the rain when we were kids?" he asked, and I nodded, feeling warm nostalgia. Then he threw away the umbrella, and we both found ourselves in the rain, laughing like children who don't care about wet clothes or cold wind. When we finally decided to hide from the rain, we found a small gazebo, cozy and hidden among the trees. I sat down on the bench, trying to warm my hands, and felt Oliver throw his jacket over my shoulders. His actions were so natural that I could hardly hold back a smile. He sat down next to us, and we were silent for a while, listening to the rain still pattering on the roof of the gazebo. "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "about how I feel." I looked up in surprise, but he was already looking at me. His eyes, always so calm, now shone with sincerity. "I want to be near you." These words sounded so simple, but I felt their weight. My heart was pounding, but at that moment I realized that there was no need for an answer. My smile said it all for me. The next few days were full of new sensations. Oliver began to find an excuse to meet more often, and every time I looked forward to these moments. One day he invited me for a walk, and we went to a place where there was neither noise nor extraneous eyes. He led me along a path that led through a dense forest until we found ourselves in a small clearing surrounded by tall trees. In the center of the clearing stood a large old oak tree, and a small plaid blanket was already waiting under its branches. "This is a surprise for you," Oliver said as he sat down next to him. He pulled out a small basket of snacks and drinks. We sat enjoying the cozy atmosphere as the sunlight filtered through the branches, creating warm spots on the grass. Oliver took out a small gift from his pocket, a bracelet with small charms. "It's a symbol of all the important moments we've shared together," he explained, putting the bracelet on my arm. I looked at him, and something in my heart told me that we would remember this moment forever. We stayed on the lawn until late in the evening. Oliver began to tell stories from his life that I had never heard before. Each of his words was like a piece of a puzzle that helped to better understand him. I listened to him talk about his dreams, his fears, his failures, and his victories, and I found myself thinking that I had never known him like this before. At some point, I myself began to share what I had kept inside me for a long time, and these conversations became a real discovery for us. The starry sky gradually unfolded above us, and we both silently looked at the twinkling stars, as in childhood. Oliver suddenly took my hand again and looked at me, his gaze quiet but determined. "I want you to know that I can be myself with you," he said, and those words were etched in my heart. At the next meeting, Oliver decided to surprise me again. He suggested doing something spontaneous that would help you feel free. We climbed a hill that had a great view. There, at the top, was waiting a small kite that Oliver had prepared in advance. "I thought it would be fun to remember how we used to run them when we were kids," he said with a smile. We gathered the snake together, and then, as the wind picked it up, we watched it rise higher and higher. Oliver laughed like a child, and I felt my heart fill with lightness. This moment was so simple and yet so precious. We ran together, holding onto the rope, and the whole world seemed to stop, leaving us with our memories and our present happiness. After the walk, we sat on the edge of the hill, watching the sun gradually disappear behind the horizon. The view was incredible. The sky played all shades of orange, pink, and gold, and a light breeze gently blew my hair. Oliver was sitting next to me, looking straight ahead, and I noticed him smiling slightly. His hands were crossed in his lap, and his green gaze seemed to be lost in the distance, as if he was remembering something important. "Have you ever thought about how time changes us?" he asked suddenly, without looking away. I thought for a moment, looking at the horizon. "Yes, but I've always believed that some things stay the same," I replied, and he turned to me. "Maybe that's true, but there are things that change us for the better. For example, the people around us." He looked me straight in the eyes, and I felt my heart stop for a few seconds. It was not just an understanding, but something more, something that is hard to put into words. A few days later, Oliver invited me to join him for another surprise. He said he wanted to show something special. We came to a small lake where the water was so clear that you could see even the smallest pebbles on the bottom. There was a small boat on the shore, and Oliver, smiling, invited me to sit down. We swam slowly, and I admired how the lines of water spread in different directions, forming gentle circles. Oliver dived calmly, pausing every now and then to show something interesting. The reflection of the sky on the surface of the water, birds flying low, or fish swimming past. At some point, he stopped rowing and let the boat drift slowly downstream. He pulled something out of his pocket, a small piece of paper folded in half. "I wrote this for you," he said softly, handing it to me. On the paper were words that I read in silence, feeling how they touched the deepest strings of my soul. We got back to shore just as it was getting dark. The lake began to be covered with a light mist, and the air became cooler. Oliver helped me off the boat with a hand. When we stepped on solid ground, he suddenly said, "I'm glad you agreed to come today. This evening means more to me than I can say." I looked at him, trying to understand why he decided to say this now. We stood by the water, and he carefully took my hand, holding it like he was afraid I would disappear. "I just want you to know that every moment I spend with you is special to me." His voice was quiet, but every word sounded clear. I couldn't help but smile, feeling my heart fill with a warmth that cannot be described. A few days later, Oliver asked me out again, but this time I didn't know what to expect. When I arrived, he was waiting for me with an album in his hands. "I thought I should remember something from our childhood," he said, opening the cover. The album contained old photos of us. Funny, awkward moments we had together years ago. We sat next to each other, turning the pages. I laughed looking at our childish faces and remembered how we used to play, how we spent the summer, how we fought over little things. Oliver pointed to each photo and told what he remembered about that moment. "And this is the day we first argued because I didn't share ice cream with you," he said with a smile. I smiled as I felt each memory create a new bridge between our past and present. The next time, Oliver suggested spending the evening watching the game. We always had our little competitions, he said, pulling out the board game we once adored as kids. We spread it on the table, and he briefly explained the rules, although I already remembered them well. His eyes lit up when the game started, and I saw the same competitive spirit that had once entertained us so much. The game went on for a long time, each of us trying to win, but at the same time, we couldn't help but laugh when one of us made a bad move. In the end, Oliver won, but instead of triumphing, he put his hand on mine and said, "Now I understand that winning doesn't matter. What matters is that you're here." His words touched something deep inside me, and I realized that this evening will remain in my memory for a long time. One evening, Oliver called and said he wanted to show me something important. When I came, he was standing with a canvas and a set of paints. Remember how I always said I wanted to learn to draw? I started working on it. The first touches have already been applied to the canvas, but he said he is still working on the composition. He invited me to help. We took the brushes and continued painting together. I felt a little clumsy, but Oliver patiently explained how to add details and what colors to use. In the end, we created something that might seem simple, but it was our joint creation. "I always wanted something to remind me of our time together," he said, looking at the finished painting. One evening, I noticed that Oliver was acting a little differently. He asked me out, but didn't tell me exactly what he was planning. When I arrived, he was standing with flashlights in his hands and smiling like a child who had just invented something interesting. "Today we will try to create our own night of stars," he said, spreading them around. We started hanging lanterns together on tree branches, creating something magical and magical. When all the lanterns shone, the space turned into a shimmering fairy tale. We sat down on the blanket in the middle and looked up as if we were really watching the stars. Oliver told stories about the constellations, inventing new, funny, and romantic ones. It was something special, something that will never be forgotten. Oliver suggested we do something more spontaneous. "I want to show you what it's like to just follow your intuition," he said, pulling me over to a box full of finger paints. I laughed, seeing his delight. "We will draw without rules," he added, and I could not refuse him. We began to paint a large canvas with our fingers, leaving chaotic strokes and marks. I couldn't help but laugh when Oliver accidentally drew a line across my cheeks. In response, I left a colored handprint on his shirt. In the end, we both looked like we were part of the picture. It was true freedom. Thoughtless, fun, and a little crazy. A few days later, Oliver unexpectedly appeared with a book in his hands. "This is something I've wanted to read to you for a long time," he said, inviting me to sit on the couch. The book looked old, with yellowed pages, and smelled of memories. He began to read, his voice calm and deep. His words filled the room, creating an invisible world around us with characters and plots that seemed so real. Time stood still, and all that mattered was his voice and the story that came to life. When he finished reading, Oliver looked at me with a quiet smile. "This story reminded me of us," he said, and I realized that this book would now become another of our memories. The evening of the next day became one of those that will be remembered forever. Oliver offered me something unexpected. "I want to teach you one of my childhood hobbies," he said, showing an old guitar. "It was my escape from everything when I was a teenager." He sat next to me, gently took my hands, and showed me how to hold the guitar correctly. The first sounds were awkward, but his patient voice encouraged me. "Take your time, just feel the rhythm." I laughed at my attempts, but felt the warmth of his presence. When I managed to play a few simple chords, Oliver said, "See, you can do it. Just give it time." His words were as important as the lesson itself. Somehow, Oliver decided to prepare something special for us. He appeared in front of my door with a basket filled with various ingredients. "Today we will cook together," he said with an enthusiasm I had never seen before. In the kitchen, everything started with chaos. Oliver insisted he knew the recipe, but many things went wrong. We laughed when the dough didn't turn out the way we wanted it to, and we threw flour at each other. In the end, we created something that resembled a dessert, and although the appearance was far from ideal, The taste turned out to be amazing. I guess it's because we made it together, Oliver said, handing me a spoonful of our creation. One day, Oliver invited me to play a simple but special game. It's something I've wanted to do for a long time. To play a question and answer game, but without the banalities, he explained. We settled down on the sofa, and he took out a notebook with prepared questions. If you could go back to any moment in your life, what would you choose? He asked, looking at me with his green eyes. I thought about it, and then shared a memory of the day we first argued as children. We laughed, remembering how it all happened. Then I asked him, "What are you most afraid of?" His answer was simple but profound. Losing you. I felt something warm and elusive capture my heart. The next evening, I decided to surprise Oliver. I brought a scrapbook with clippings and things I've kept for years. This is my own collection of memories, I explained, opening the cover. There were little notes, photos, even dried flowers that reminded me of important moments in our lives. Oliver scrutinized every detail, sometimes laughing quietly or asking why I kept this or that thing. His reaction was warm and sincere. At the end, he said, "I never thought our memories could be so meaningful. It shows how much you mean to me." His words left a deep mark in my heart. A few days later, Oliver suggested doing something completely unexpected. He was holding 2 large sheets of paper and a box of pastels. "We'll draw how we see each other," he said, and I laughed at first. "I can't draw at all," I objected, but he insisted. "It's not about skill, it's about feeling." We sat down across from each other and everyone began to create their own picture. At first it was difficult, but I imagined his eyes, his smile, and I just gave free rein to my hands. When we finished, we exchanged sheets. In his drawing, I looked like a character from a fairy tale, with bright eyes and a radiant aura. "That's you for me," he said. I could barely contain my emotions, looking at the way he saw me. One evening, we decided to go for a walk, even though the weather was a bit overcast. The clouds hung low and the wind rustled the branches of the trees. "Let's go. It adds to the adventure," Oliver said with a smile that always made me go along with any of his ideas. We were walking, talking about everything in the world, when suddenly it started to rain. It wasn't a heavy downpour, just a light but cool rain that made us laugh and run away. Oliver stopped in the middle of the road, spread his arms, and put his face in the rain. "This is life," he said, looking at me as if he wanted me to understand something important. At that moment, I felt that this is really life. Simple, wet, happy. The rain gave way to a warm evening, and we returned to the house, soaked but happy. Oliver lit the candles and put the kettle on. "Tea after rain is the best way to warm up," he said, handing me a cup of the aromatic drink. We sat by the window, watching the raindrops still falling on the glass. I held a hot cup in my hands, and he placed a blanket over my shoulders, adding even more warmth. "These are the moments I want to remember," Oliver said, looking at me. His gaze was so deep that I felt as if he was reading my every thought. Later that evening, Oliver pulled a box of photos from the shelf. "It's something I've wanted to share for a long time," he said, and we started looking at pictures from his childhood. He pretended to be a small, slightly clumsy boy, and we laughed at his funny stories. I noticed a photo of the two of us taken many years ago. We were just children, standing next to each other with big smiles on our faces. "That's the day I realized you're more than just a friend to me," Oliver said quietly. I looked at him, and at that moment, our memories connected, creating something new, common. The next morning, Oliver suggested a little creative experiment. "We will write letters to each other, but not now," he explained. "These should be words you'll want to read years from now." He gave me a piece of paper and a pen, and we sat down at the table, each deep in thought. I could not start writing for a long time. Memories, emotions, moments that are difficult to convey in words were swarming in my head. But little by little, I found the very words that I would like him to read years from now. When we had finished, Oliver put the 2 letters in a small box and said, Let it be our secret until we are ready to reveal them. Later that day, Oliver suggested an outing that was to be special. I know a place where I always feel at peace, he said, and we set off together. We were silent on the way, but it was a pleasant silence filled with mutual understanding. When we got to the place, I was amazed. It was a clearing surrounded by tall trees through which the sun's rays broke through. Oliver settled down on the grass and gestured for me to sit next to him. I always find answers to my questions here, he said quietly. We sat next to each other, listening to the wind and the birds, not exchanging words, but understanding each other without them. This evening, we lit a small fire and sat together, wrapped in a blanket. Oliver talked about his dreams, plans, and fears. Sometimes I fear that life is just a series of moments that we don't have time to appreciate, he said, looking into the fire. I took his hand and said, we can make these moments special, every single one of them. His green gaze rested on me, and he whispered softly, you always know what to say. We sat for a long time, watching the sparks disappear into the darkness, and felt the moment become important. The next day, Oliver decided to show me one of his favorite movies. We settled on the sofa with popcorn and warm blankets. This is something special for me, he said, turning on the screen. I noticed how attentively he followed the plot, sometimes smiling or quietly commenting on the scenes. But what struck me the most was how he looked at me at moments that were important to him. There was a feeling that he wanted to share not only the film, but also a part of his soul. The next morning, I woke up earlier than Oliver. The sun was just beginning to rise, flooding the room with soft light. I noticed how he was sleeping. His features seemed even calmer. It was the moment when I realized how important this feeling next to him had become for me. I decided to make breakfast. In the kitchen, I found his note with the signature, "Mornings are always better with fresh coffee." This simple gesture made me smile. When Oliver appeared in the kitchen, disheveled and still a little sleepy, he thanked me by hugging me from behind and pulling me close. That day, we decided to stay home and spend time together. Oliver suggested trying to put together an old puzzle he found in a box, among other things. It's from my childhood, but I could never finish it myself, he said with a laugh. We sat on the floor, scattered pieces of the puzzle, and tried to put together a picture. Each element we found brought us pleasure, and working together made us laugh at failures and rejoice at successes. By the end of the day, we were almost done, leaving a few pieces for tomorrow to continue this good time. In the evening, we decided to look at the sunrise. It's going to be a nice sky today, Oliver said, picking up a blanket and some pillows. We settled under the open sky, looking at the endless space with twinkling stars. Each star is a reminder of how little we know about this world, but at the same time, they seem to connect us to something bigger, Oliver said, pointing to the brightest spot in the sky. I was looking into this space, and next to him it seemed even more significant. The next day, Oliver suggested doing something spontaneous. Let's try to create our own recipe, he said, pulling out various ingredients on the table. We started experimenting, adding spices, mixing flavors, and laughed at the strange but unexpectedly delicious results. When the dish was ready, we sat down at the table and divided it in half. We could definitely open a restaurant, Oliver joked. I smiled, feeling that this simple yet heartfelt moment would stay with me for a long time. After lunch, we decided to do something more peaceful. Oliver suggested reading a favorite book aloud. He chose a volume that he said would make me smile. We sat down near the window, through which the soft sunlight was breaking through. His voice was deep and calm as he read. I listened, but my thoughts were partly occupied by him. His green eyes sparkled in the light, and his lips curved into a smile at every funny phrase. I caught myself remembering this moment. Not the plot of the book, but his voice and the warmth I felt next to him. This evening, Oliver proposed to create a joint drawing. I know I'm not very good at drawing, but this will be fun, he said, pulling out an album and paints. We sat down on the floor, and each took up his part of the canvas. We laughed at the clumsy strokes, but by the end of the work, our drawing turned out to be surprisingly harmonious. This is our art together, Oliver said, adding the final touch. I felt that this moment, filled with colors and emotions, will remain with me as another important memory. The next morning, when we woke up, the sky was overcast and a light rain had started. Oliver suggested going outside. "This is perfect weather to enjoy nature in a different way," he said. We walked under an umbrella, listening to the sound of drops falling on the leaves. His hand was on my shoulder, and I was holding an umbrella, protecting us from the rain. There was something incredibly simple about that moment, yet meaningful at the same time. The rain did not interfere. It added atmosphere and made this walk even more special. Returning home after a walk, we warmed up with hot tea. Oliver, sitting next to him, told stories from his childhood. His voice was warm and his green eyes so close. I felt how his memories became a part of my life. I always wanted to find a person with whom I could share such moments, he admitted, looking at me. I put my hand on his, not knowing how to respond with words, but he understood everything without them. The evening was drawing to a close, but we sat next to each other for a long time. Oliver took the guitar that was in the corner of the room and started playing. "I'm not a professional, but I love this tune," he said, tuning the strings. The sounds of the guitar filled the room, creating a magical atmosphere. His playing was simple, but there was sincerity in it. I sat next to him, watching his fingers slide across the strings and the melody reverberating in my heart. It was a moment that I wanted to stop and save forever. The next morning, we woke up early, determined to see the sunrise. Oliver insisted that we take blankets and warm tea in a thermos. "This will be a good start to the day," he said as we settled on the rise. The sun began to rise, pouring a golden light that touched our faces. We sat next to each other, wrapped in one blanket, and enjoyed the silence. It was a moment when words were superfluous and each other's presence was the most important. After watching the sunrise in the morning, we returned home, but I felt that I wanted to create something with my own hands. Oliver suggested making a small photo album of moments of our time together. We've printed out some photos we've taken over the last few weeks. Each page of the album came to life as we glued the pictures and signed them. Oliver drew small pictures nearby, adding humor. It was not just creativity, but a way to relive all those moments we had already shared. In the evening, before going about our business, we decided to write letters to each other, but not to open them right away. "It's in case we're suddenly far away and want to remember that time," Oliver explained. I thought for a long time about what to write, choosing each word with care. As we exchanged letters, Oliver said, "Don't open it now. Keep it like a little secret." It was a special ending to the day, a reminder of how important these moments have become for us. The next morning, while I was making tea, Oliver came over with an unexpected offer. "What if we do something spontaneous?" he asked with a sly smile. His eyes were shining as if he had already thought of what to surprise me with. We decided to make a map of wishes. It was a simple idea. Write things we would like to do together. We found a large sheet of paper, markers, and started drawing. Oliver would draw funny symbols describing his dreams, and I would add my own ideas, laughing at his fantasies. It was another moment that showed how easily and naturally we understand each other. After creating a map of desires, we decided to try to fulfill the first point, to cook something new together. Smiling, Oliver pulled out a recipe for a pie that his grandmother always made. We measured the ingredients together, laughed at how the flour ended up not only in the bowl, but also on our faces. While the cake was baking, the kitchen was filled with a sweet aroma, and we sat on the floor, tired, but happy. "I guess this is what happiness looks like," Oliver said as he watched me wipe the flour off his nose. When the cake was ready, we decided to enjoy it in an unusual way. Oliver offered to take him out on the balcony and eat, wrapped in blankets. It was an unexpected idea, but I thought it was wonderful. Sitting next to each other, we shared pieces of pie while watching the sunset. His arms wrapped around me, and the warm aroma of baking and the evening breeze created the perfect atmosphere. "This is the most delicious pie I've ever eaten," he said, smiling. Late at night, we played a board game that Oliver found in the closet. "It's a classic, but I'm sure you'll lose," he joked as he laid out the figures. We laughed at every bad move and argued about the rules. Oliver sometimes played specifically to see my reaction. When I won, he threw his hands up in surrender and said, "I always knew you were my main rival." The next day, I decided to share a story with Oliver that I had never told anyone before. It was a moment from my childhood that left a wound in my heart. We were sitting on the sofa, I was staring intently at the cup of tea in my hands, and he was waiting patiently. I always felt like I had to live up to someone's expectations. When I failed, it felt like the end of the world. I began, feeling the words fall from my lips with strange ease. Oliver listened intently without interrupting, his gaze full of support. When I finished, he moved closer and wrapped his arms around my shoulders, softly saying, "You are so much more than anyone's expectations. Who you are right now is who you are meant to be, and that's beautiful." These words penetrated deep into my soul, and for the first time in a long time, I felt that I could fully trust someone. In the evening, Oliver decided to cheer me up. "There's one thing that always makes you forget all your worries," he said, pulling out an album of old photos from the closet. We sat at the table looking at the pictures, and each frame seemed like a separate story. Some of the photos showed his childhood mischief, smeared bicycle shots, chocolate stains on his cheeks. Others showed more serious moments, school competitions, the first graduation. Each photo was accompanied by his comment, from funny to incredibly touching. When we got to the photo of us both as children, I couldn't help but smile. "Is that us?" I asked, wondering how long we had known each other. "Yes. Maybe fate has decided that we will always be together," he said with a warm smile. The next day, we decided to go for a walk together. Oliver packed a small bag of snacks and said he had a special idea. We walked several blocks talking about the plans we had made the day before. Eventually, he led me to a place where paper lanterns could be launched. Oliver had prepared everything in advance. Bright flashlights lay neatly folded in a box. We lit them and, holding them together, released them into the sky. The lanterns rose higher and higher, illuminating the evening sky, and I couldn't look away. Each of these flashlights is like one of our wishes. I believe they will come true," Oliver said, looking at me with that confidence I've always appreciated in him. When we returned, I realized how important these moments had become. Many thoughts flashed through my head, and I unexpectedly decided to tell Oliver about my feelings. We were sitting on the couch and I started talking, trying to find the right words. I've always been afraid of trusting someone and then losing them. But you changed that. With you, I feel truly happy," I said, looking him straight in the eyes. Oliver smiled, his green eyes warming even more. "I wanted to tell you the same thing. You've become a part of my life that I don't want to lose." Those words were the best way to end the day. The next morning, Oliver suggested that we spend the day together, without plans or schedules. "Let's just do whatever comes to mind," he said, smiling. We decided to start with a short walk. His ease and desire to enjoy every moment was contagious. We walked slowly, talking about everything in the world, from favorite books to childhood memories. Suddenly, he stopped and said, "Let's choose one place that will be ours alone, and we will come here when we want to be together." I was surprised but supported the idea. We found a cozy corner with a bench hidden among the trees. The place was quiet, and the world seemed to stop around us. Sitting next to each other, we were just silent, looking at the sky. There was something magical about the silence we shared. Time seemed to stop, and all that mattered was this moment. In the afternoon, we decided to cook something new together. This time it was homemade pasta. Oliver, with indescribable delight, talked about a recipe that his mother had once shown him. We divided the responsibilities. He kneaded the dough, and I worked on the sauce. As we worked, I noticed how serious he was about the process. "It's not just pasta," he joked. "This is art." His concentrated expression was so funny that I couldn't help but throw some flour at him. Oliver laughed in response and did the same. After a few minutes, our kitchen resembled a scene from culinary chaos, but it was completely carefree and fun. In the evening, we decided to watch an old movie. Oliver insisted it was one of his favorites, and I couldn't refuse. We settled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, and made a big bowl of popcorn. The film was funny and touching at the same time. I noticed him sneaking glances at me during touching moments, as if he wanted to make sure I was feeling them too. At one point, he quietly said, "You're not just my friend, you're my inspiration. Everything seems better with you." His words seemed unexpected, but so sincere that I felt my heart speed up. When the movie ended, Oliver unexpectedly offered to go outside. We found ourselves under an open sky where the stars looked brighter than usual. He took my hand and said quietly, "I want this moment to last forever." We stood in silence, just looking at the starry sky. The wind was chilly, but his presence was warm. I could feel his hand gently squeezing mine, as if he wanted to make sure I'd stay close. The next morning, I woke up thinking that the last few days had become special for me. Oliver seemed to know how to turn the simplest moments into something more. We met in the kitchen, and I saw him making coffee, filling the room with a warm aroma. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, handing me a cup. His look was so caring that I involuntarily smiled. "Yes, thank you for everything," I replied, inhaling the aroma of the drink. We sat down to breakfast together, and Oliver suggested we talk about plans for the day. "Let's do something unusual. For example, let's write a list of wishes that we want to fulfill together," he suggested. The idea sounded interesting, and I happily agreed. It was a new step, not only to enjoy the moments, but also to think about the future together. We started making a wish list while sitting in a room that was cozy and quiet. Oliver picked up a notebook and a pen, intently writing his first wish: to watch a shooting star together. I laughed. "You are very romantic." And she added her own: to learn something new together, for example, to dance. Each desire was a reflection of us, our hopes and dreams. The list was gradually filled with small and big ideas, from trips to simple but meaningful moments. At one point, Oliver stopped and said, "My main wish is for you to always be around." His words made me feel that we are already building something real. In the evening, we decided to fulfill one of the wishes from the list, to learn something new. Oliver suggested dancing, and I couldn't refuse, even though I was a little nervous. He turned on soft music and held out his hand. "Let me show you how to do this." His movements were uncertain but sincere, and it made me laugh. "Are you sure you know how it works?" I asked jokingly. We spun around to the beat of the tune, laughed and stepped on each other's feet. But it didn't matter. This moment was perfect in its imperfection. At the end of the song, Oliver hugged me tightly. That's right. The main thing is to feel. When the music died down, we decided to talk about our favorite tunes. Oliver pulled out a guitar that I hadn't even noticed before. "I haven't played in a while, but I'll make an exception for you," he said with a smile. His fingers gently touched the strings, and the room filled with a melody that brought back memories. I closed my eyes, listening to each note resonate in my heart. It was a moment that needed no words. The music spoke for us. When he finished playing, I couldn't help but say, "That was great. You're a real talent." Oliver was slightly embarrassed, but I could tell he was pleased to hear this. The next day, we decided to return to our cozy corner, which we previously called our place. Oliver took a book with him that he wanted to read aloud to me. We sat down on the bench and he started reading. His voice was calm and confident. Each word sounded distinct and insightful. I listened, watching how the sun's rays played on his dark hair. His focused gaze and reading manner made it feel as if the words were written just for the two of us. At one point he stopped, looked up at me and asked, "Do you like it?" I just nodded, trying to hide how impressed I was by this moment. It seemed as if we were talking not with words, but with something much deeper. After dinner, Oliver decided to teach me how to play chess. "It's not just a game, it's a mental exercise," he said, laying out the pieces. At first I felt unsure, but his patience and calm manner of explanations helped me to quickly learn the rules. We would laugh at my bad moves, and he would come up with funny names for each piece to make the process more interesting. During the game, he said, "Chess is like life. You have to be able to see ahead, but not be afraid to take risks." His words made me think. This game wasn't just about strategy, it was about the two of us learning together and supporting each other. In the evening, when it was getting dark outside, Oliver suggested having a small picnic just at home. He brought out a blanket, spread fruits, cheeses, and a bottle of wine on it. "This is our improvisation," he said, smiling. We sat next to each other, tasting wine and talking about everything in the world. He told stories from his childhood, and I shared my experiences. It seemed like this evening could last forever. As we finished our wine, Oliver suggested we make a wish. "I want each of our days to be as special as this one." His words burned into my heart, and I felt how much our relationship had changed during that time. Before going to sleep, Oliver prepared another surprise. He took out the candle, put it on the table, and said, "Let's give thanks for this day." We sat next to each other, looking at the flames. He spoke first, listing all the moments that made this day special. His words were simple but very sincere. Then it was my turn, and I felt that I was rediscovering the importance of small things that we often overlook. The candle crackled quietly, creating a special coziness. The moment was another reminder of how much can be found in the simple things when the right person is around. The morning began quietly. We decided to take our time, allowing ourselves a little rest. Oliver was preparing breakfast, and I, sitting at the table, watched him work. His movements were calm, focused, but at the same time relaxed. "I'm not a chef, but I'm trying," he joked as I laughed as I saw him tentatively flipping a pancake. Breakfast turned out to be simple, but it was one of the most delicious meals of my life. We talked, discussing what was in store for us today. "Maybe we can do one more thing off our list?" he suggested, and I gladly agreed, feeling that each new day becomes special. We went to fulfill one of the items on the list, to observe nature in a peaceful environment. Oliver suggested we find a place where we could be alone. We sat next to each other and listened to the sounds of the world around us. He took out a small camera and started taking pictures. "You're a great photographer," I said as he showed me some shots. On one of them, there was a bright moment, how a light wind touched my hair. "True beauty is in the details," he said quietly, glancing at me. His words made me blush, but I just smiled, grateful for the moment. In the evening, Oliver proposed another unusual idea, to paint together. He got out paper, pencils, and paints, and we started. "I'm not an artist, but I'll try," he said, drawing simple lines. I laughed. The main thing is not skill, but emotions. We created chaotic drawings, occasionally laughing and discussing what we did best. At the end of the evening, I saw Oliver carefully drawing something on my sheet. It was a small flower with my name on it. "This is for you," he said with a slight smile, and the gesture touched me. When we finished, Oliver suggested that we hang our drawings in the room. "This will be our little gallery," he said, pinning the sheets to the wall. Each picture evoked a new memory in us. We discussed exactly what we wanted to convey and joked about how these masterpieces could become popular. At one point, he picked up one of the drawings and said, "I'll keep this one. It will remind me of how we spent this evening." His gaze was so sincere that I just nodded, feeling this day become another important part of our history.